episode 29 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slawinski.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. Show note. As we announced on last week's episode, due to recent events, due to recent global events that you can listen to in episode 26, we've decided to hold off on getting an official studio space. But the show must go on, and we're going to replace discussions of studio growing pains with more guests. We have planned out the next full year of guests and have started reaching out, so I'm happy to announce that some of the upcoming folks we're going to have on the show are Carl Magnus Strotzen, a former GM of DICE, who is now joining and investing in the publisher Raw Fury Games, which is the same publisher David Martinez from episode 21 is a part of. We also have Ashley Birch coming on the show, who many of you may know from Hey Ash, What You Playing?
Cool.
Yeah,
this is my first time hearing this list, so that's very exciting.
Yeah, it's a really well-known YouTube series, but she will be discussing her VO work, which voiceover work. We're not supposed to use acronyms on the show, and I know that, but sometimes you just fall into it. Anyway, her voiceover work, which I'm sure Mike is looking forward to, and we have the crew from Z-Boyd Games, best known for Cthulhu Saves the World, but their upcoming game Cosmic Star Heroine continues to elevate that classically inspired RPG design sensibility that they have. So yeah, for the rest of the year, we only have about 6 or so episodes where it looks like we won't have a guest talking about a particular aspect of the industry, and 2 or 3 of those 6 are kind of scheduled for the games that we have coming out, and having some folks that worked on those games talking about working on those games. One of them, which we still have not announced, but I
was going to say, we're going to have some stuff to talk about as of the last few days.
Yeah. Yes, we are. So if you have a particular topic about the industry you'd like discussed on the show, send an email to contact@bithellgames.com. That's contact@bithellgames.com, and we'll see who we can get from a very enormous roster of experts to come and talk about it. So, Mike, what are you playing?
What am I playing? I've played a little bit of Mirror's Edge, but to be honest, I've been working most of this week. It's been a very heavy week for us. I've been watching people play Pokemon Go with interest. You've been playing it, right?
That's what I've been playing.
Then let's jump onto that, because I'm fascinated. My question, as a game designer, should I play Pokemon Go?
No, not really.
Okay.
So I would think it's that inspiration you get as a child, or even it's so funny because we actually have a question. Our reader mail question of today's show actually goes into this. But the thing about it is that it's a Google map of the world. Yeah. And there are spots in the world that are Pokestops, and you go to those Pokestops, and these are places in the real world. So, for example, in my town, if I go into the center of town, one of the electrical boxes that has a mural on it is a Pokestop. And then the statue that is in front of a Unitarian church is a Pokestop, but the Unitarian church itself is a Pokestop. And there's a clock tower, and the clock tower is the gym. But anyway, let's really go back. Pokemon is a 20-plus-year-old franchise, and I highly recommend, if you have no idea what Pokemon are, just go to the wiki page, because trying to explain it here is like trying to explain culture. It's really hard. It's gonna take a while. But you go to these Pokestops, and you flick the spin dial, and you get Pokeballs from it. And then as you're walking through the real world, you get a little ping, and Pokemon appears on your phone or your Pokedex. And you press on that, and then an augmented reality Pokemon is projected into the world. And then you look like a silly person, but then again, like everyone is playing this right now.
I was going to say, I'm interested, like, do you see people congregating around these places in your town?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I'm in a section of Boston. Like, I'm not downtown or anything like that. But yeah, you absolutely see like people walking around playing Pokemon Go. When I go to the bakery, we sit outside, and I can just absolutely see like, you know, some late 20-something, 30-something walking down the street, like and it's like, yep, you're playing Pokemon Go. You can spot the trainers.
It's not quite gotten that much over here yet, because right now it's only officially been out in the UK for like a day or two. So as I've been walking around town, I've not seen it yet. But I saw the only time I've seen it is I've seen a few kids running past yelling, names of Pokemon or whatever. So I assume that I live near to somewhere which is a spot, because there's with tourists, especially in London, like tourists clearly are like playing the hell out of this game to like explore London, which is really interesting. But I've not seen, because I don't know where the Pokestops are. I've been kind of guessing where they are.
Yeah, you might live on or near a Pokestop, and then you are one of the worst people in the world, because you're just so unfair. You're cheating. You just keep spinning that dial every 10 minutes and getting your Pokeballs. It's really unfair. I don't like you. Go Team Valor. So you go to the Pokestops. You go out in the real world. You capture Pokemon AR, and then you're just collecting them all. And then you go to your gym, and the gyms are controlled by the 3 teams: Valor, Mistake, and Hufflepuff. And it's Valor, Mystic, and genuinely can't remember. Inspiration. I'm so sorry, Yellow Team, but you're just gonna have to deal with this. And you take your Pokemon that you train up or have given candy. So if you get multiples of a particular Pokemon, you send them to the guy that looks like a Ghostbuster. I can't remember his name, Dr. something. And you get candy for it, and then you feed those candies to your Pokemon.
It's like a Soylent Green situation.
Yes. And then level them up. And then you take your leveled up Poke to the gym and battle, and then that's what you do. That's the game right now.
Okay. And I presume there's a lot of updates in the running. They'll be expanding on that. It doesn't look like there's a massive variety of Pokemon yet. Is it just the first few that were in the...
No. There's like 150, 200 or something like that. Whatever.
Which would be like the first generation Pokemon. I think first generation, I remember this was like 150 or something like that.
They're there. They're all there.
Cool. Okay.
And it's you go out into the real world and you capture things. So
you got to catch them all, right?
Yeah, and it makes those kids get out of the house.
It is interesting for that. That's the aspect that I find interesting, that it's affecting people's behavior. I often joke that like most of my childhood memories are kind of blurry because there's a Transformer in the foreground. Like I was that kid who had like, a Transformer with me at all times as a kid, and therefore when I try and remember like, big events like moving house or weddings or going to places, I always remember genuinely those things as like in the background while I was playing with the Transformer. And it'd be really interesting to talk to these kids in like 20 years time, and they're remembering like, going on holiday, but it being about capturing Pokemon rather than like necessarily being in the moment. Because I think kids always need those distractions and those things that they get really into. And that's what's interesting to me, is like, this is going to be an event that all these kids remember, even if the game, falls from grace or is less interesting in 2 months. Like,
forget kids. I wanted to get on a plane and visit you just so I could walk around London for all those Pokestops and see if there were different Pokemon in the UK.
Well, you're coming over in a couple of months, hopefully, so that would make sense.
Yeah, but now this thing is, I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole think pieces about it.
There's been a lot of the hottest of takes, right?
Because it is it's a phenomenon. Like,
Yeah.
this is
It's a
not
big shared cultural moment, which is, to be honest, it's hitting that stage where I feel I need to play it just because everyone's playing it, you know what I mean? Which is obviously what, the people making money off of these kind of projects want. It's almost like a social guilt. It's that thing that blockbuster movies try and instill in you that, well, if you've not seen this film, then you're going to be out of the conversation. You're going to be away from the zeitgeist. And I'm tempted just to pick it up, not because necessarily I want to play it, but just because everyone's talking about it, and it just I feel left out.
Well, like, for example, I had to go earlier this week to another town because my in-laws are moving, and this is now that just sounds weird. A friend.
You're helping them.
I'm helping family. There we go.
You're helping them move out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to go to town hall to pick up parking passes that I have to put on meters and tie up. So anyway, I go to town hall, and of course, town hall, because it has several monuments in front of it, are Pokestops. So I grabbed Pokestops, went upstairs, got those parking passes, came back downstairs, and a Pokemon appeared as I walked outside. I was like, oh, I gotta go get the Pokemon. So I made sure to get away from the building to like the little park that was just across the street. And I tapped on the Pokemon. So then once you tap on the Pokemon, it appears in the real world. And yes, there is a way to switch off the AR. But it really doesn't stop you from having to hold up your phone anyway. So I just leave the AR on.
Yeah.
So I do that, and the Pokemon was genuinely right behind this elderly woman just trying to have her lunch. So like I'm standing there to the right of this woman. You can see her eyes like darting and like kind of looking at me.
Oh,
like,
no.
what is he doing?
No.
So I captured the Pokemon as like, I'm really sorry, but there was a Pokemon right behind you.
She's telling stories about the crazy guy she saw in the park.
No, because this is where I do what I do. So I was just like, I'm really sorry, but there was a Pokemon behind you. She didn't say, what is a Pokemon? The first thing out of her mouth, and this is, 5 days after the whole, because it started like last Friday, and this was on like Tuesday. So it's only been like 4 or 5 days since this whole thing started. First thing out of her mouth, oh, I heard about this on NPR this week.
That's the thing. Like, it's all over. I mean, I've heard about it on NPR, but like all of the news stations are doing, I've seen clips of like every major American news network or something. The British news stuff is starting to kick in now that it's official over here. Yeah, it's in the zeitgeist. It's one of those games that's broken. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, people have lots of hot takes on this, but Pokemon, Pokemon was already a household name. Like, it's not, the average person, even if you show an image of Pikachu to someone who's never played video games, they'll go, oh, that's a Pokemon, or that's Pikachu. They might not know what every single one of these creatures is, but like it's known. So,
but that's the thing. It was
all set. It was all set. I'm waiting for the Disney version. That's the thing now, is how quickly will Disney get out their augmented reality game, because it seems like something you could duplicate with other big known franchises.
Well, Disney got out of that whole video game. I mean, they just like restructured their entire.
Yeah, but they're still doing licensing, aren't they? So they had it very recently. Came out their Crossy Road Disney version.
Well,
so
and
I can see them getting a mobile developer to do do us a Pokemon Go with Mickey Mouse in it. I can see that happening.
Yeah, and I mean, they could do it specifically with the company that did the Pokemon Go one. But to finish the thing off is I actually took the next 10 minutes and sat there with the woman and just explained to her the whole entire, and showed it to her, and she's and it was the classic response she had after that. Yeah, but why?
And then you went into an existential crisis and walked the parks of that town for about 2 hours without playing Pokemon, considering your life choices.
No, I just do the same thing that I did to my mom growing up, which is just like, you know me. You know the terrible things that I could be doing instead. Wouldn't you rather me be sitting in front of the television playing video games? Like, you know what's out there, right? I think a bunch of kids or adults or humans playing Pokemon Go is a far less dangerous use of time than what the idle hand of a person is capable of.
And it's a good ambassador as well. Like, it's, you know, it isn't violent or not overly violent. It's not about hurting people or whatever. Thematically, like, it's a good ambassador game. I mean, it is basically cartoon cockfighting for kids. But, like, if you don't look at it that closely, then it's a nice, friendly thing. Like, it's one of those games that isn't, you know, outwardly embarrassing. You know, games that you often, like, you know, I play a lot of mature titles, I play a lot of stuff like that, and I love it. But you do often have to, like, explain to outsiders, you know, non-gamers, like, this is weird, but, like, it's fine. Whereas Pokemon is I think it's a good ambassador for the medium. It's a very positive, friendly thing for the outside world to be looking at.
No, we started having the stories this week of, like,
like robberies and girls finding dead bodies.
The robberies or like the girl that, like, walked into the street and got hit by a car.
God!
And it's the thing about it though is that the game, every time it boots up, literally every time it boots up, says, be aware of your surroundings. Like, it is
well,
very...
it has to, presumably, right?
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a liability issue as well. But it is clearly telling you, hey, look out. And yeah, you do. So if you're a trainer out there in the real world trying to catch your Pokemon, yes, please be aware of your surroundings, because the last thing any of us want you to do is feed the mass media negative stories about gaming, because that's been going on long enough. And yeah, that was always my fun sort of thing, was whenever I had to go on, like, Fox or CBS or anything along those lines and try to explain a situation.
Defend the entire medium,
right?
Against this stuff.
But it wasn't even defending; it was just rationally talking about it.
Yeah, the moral panics, they come and go, and it's been interesting. I think the press has been relatively good around Pokemon Go, but, like, yeah, we're hitting the point in the cycle where the negativity usually tends to kind of raise up, especially in American media, where, you know, the game's been out for long enough.
Stop it, you people and your Sun and your newspapers.
No, that's what. No. The only reason I'm saying in American media is because it's not been out long enough in the UK. Like, in the UK, that negativity will hit in about a week.
Yeah,
like I'm saying, like, we're earlier in the narrative here than you are in the States. Is my point.
Because UK.
Oh, the tabloids here are terrible. Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's magical what y'all get to say.
Well, we have it flipped. So you guys tend to have more kind of extreme television news, and here it's the newspapers. Like, it's flipped. Like, our tabloid newspapers, to my eyes, aren't worse than, you know, some of the stuff on some of your TV networks. Whereas our TV networks generally stay relatively centrist. Like, they lean a little bit back and forth depending on which channel you're watching, but, like, generally pretty safe television, and then the newspapers go crazy. It's just the other way around in the US. I'm guessing because, you know, US news, like, kind of adopted television a lot quicker than here. Like, here, the newspapers obviously had been around longer and were more embedded and more kind of, I think we're a bit slower to realize the power of television for that kind of partisan stuff. But anyway, we have gotten off topic.
I'm just waiting for the Sun headline that's like pokey prostitutes.
Oh, it's coming.
What favors are your children giving for a Charmander? Like, something along those lines.
It will happen, but I think we've got a good week until it happens here. Whereas I feel like in America, you're probably gonna start getting that soon, just because you do the positive buzz story at the start, and then a few days pass, and then it's like, is it really as good as everyone says? And then a couple of days later, you do, it's actually evil, and then you maybe do well, actually, it's probably fine, and then everyone loses interest. Like, that's the news cycle, right, on these kind of things. So we're at a slightly earlier stage in the process because it's only officially just come out here.
And now it's time for what's going on at the studio. We've been busy. We've been busy in our own corners. It's really what we've been busy.
Yeah, which is rare for us. Like, we've really gone off and done very separate things.
Yeah, it's typically, just to give a sense of what things were like before, every morning I wake up, Mike and I have a conversation pretty much every single day where we cover the day's events or things that are happening, and then go off and usually keep in touch during the day. But genuinely, for the last couple weeks, it's been you go over there, I go over here. There are a couple days during the week we just don't talk at all.
We don't talk anymore, Alexander. This happens in every marriage.
It's okay. But yeah, you've been focusing on optimization.
Yeah. So we're gonna, I think probably listeners for the last month or so, the last couple of months have probably guessed that I'm doing some stuff that I can't really talk about. But the optimization is the thing that we've been doing kind of recently. We're trying to hit a really good frame rate, really good looking game, and we're doing so with some constraints. And it's an interesting process. I'm getting a kick out of it. Also, for me, I'm becoming a better programmer because I have to be. I think I've become a bit lazy, especially so with Volume. I did all the core gameplay coding on that. Did most of the game code outside of in the AI, outside of I think user interface. I passed off a lot of that stuff and server stuff. So, but still, it was a lot of my stuff. But then I had someone else come in and do optimization for me, which meant that I was writing some absolutely terrible code, and then someone else would clean it up. But what's nice about modern systems, is a lot of the time you don't necessarily need to worry about that so much because you've got a lot of power. If you're making an open world game, then yeah, you need to get that stuff locked down. But if you're making games like Volume and Thomas Was Alone, which maybe aren't pushing those visual boundaries quite as much as they could, and maybe a bit smaller in terms of scope, then you can get away with a lot and still achieve a game that's stable, runs at a good frame rate, and looks nice.
It's been one of my awakenings being on the dev side. You bringing up open world games. I look at something like Skyrim or Fallout now, like one of those Bethesda games, and it's just my living nightmare. Like I don't ever want to.
Just in terms of scope and the challenge of making something like that.
It's overwhelming. Like I really don't think that team gets enough credit for what they have accomplished there.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I think actually it's less sexy, but like the managerial side intrigues me on those kind of projects because it's impossible for one person to really kind of have everything in a game like that in their heads. So there's a lot more relying on people kind of below you. I had a really good chat. I'm not going to say who, but I had a really good chat with the creative director of a mega open world franchise, and just asked him basically like, how do you actually design a game when you have hundreds of people actually kind of implementing this stuff? And he was like, I met like 30 people on that team realistically, like in terms of any kind of long-term conversations. You work and you trust the people who are working for you to implement the vision, and then they trust the 30 people under them. It's like it's a really interesting kind of hierarchical system, which terrifies me as well. I don't think it's the kind of game that I'd ever want to make. The thing that interests me,
it's everyone doing a trust fall exercise all at once.
It really is. It really is. And when that works, it can be great. When it doesn't work, we've all played those games. So I think open world, I don't want to ever make a game that's that massive. What I do like about open world is I think that there is a real potential in taking open world kind of design and putting it into smaller spaces, and that's something I want to play with at some point.
Yeah. No, other than the Skyrims or the Fallouts, the other sort of classic example of this is the Assassin's Creed series, because that is known to be a series that is compiled from like 8 or 9 different studios. At least with Bethesda, it's like, okay, as far as I'm aware, it's very centralized. It's the team is under the same roof or only a few roofs, and it's fine. Whereas the Assassin's Creed ones, I mean, that there has to be a hive mind. Like there has to be like this central computer.
I think that's the thing is I think there isn't. I think that there is a central kind of thought process, but there's a lot of trust. Weirdly, I think it puts a lot of power into individual teams and team members. I think there's a lot of trust and a lot of feedback loops and kind of everyone talking to each other. It's interesting. I think it's completely different. I don't think they're even in the same industry as us. I think it's a completely different process. Like I don't think I'd be very well suited to it, because I think for me, I like being very hands on. And that's what I'm enjoying with the stuff we're doing right now, is that, you know, I'm getting to learn skills that, frankly, if we were making a project the size of Volume right now, someone else would be doing. You know, I'm learning the optimization. I've really kind of jumped in with shaders, which is something that I don't think many of like the kind of the indie kind of Unity devs necessarily play with. You know, I think, you know, for those who don't know, Unity, which is the engine a lot of people use at the moment, has a lot of built-in shaders. Shaders are essentially the code that draws stuff on the screen. So, you know, that tells you how to take a mesh and what to do with that mesh in order to make something pretty on the screen for the player. And there's a lot of defaults in that, a lot of kind of standard ways of doing things. I started playing with shaders on Volume to do that shatter effect. You know, in Volume, there's that cute effect when kind of we explode the world in triangles and do stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think, and that was the first time I played with shaders, because actually the world isn't exploding. That's all done by effectively breaking the way the game renders objects, essentially creating glitches. I think it creates a nice effect, but that was kind of my first experience with shaders. And now, you know, making the game we're making right now, building our own shader system kind of from the ground up. I don't think the game we're doing right now has a single default shader in it. Like, I think every single thing we're rendering on the screen is effectively through our own shader code. Now, that's not to say I've built an engine. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on under the hood that I'm not.
So will I be getting emails from producers telling me, like, after they listen to this episode, like, Slawinski, what are you doing? Get him off the shader thing. It's a total waste of time. Like, you could buy that off the Unity store for $5. What are you doing?
So shaders are really interesting in that they're very specific. Is that, like, you know, taking the shaders we're building right now, they are very specific to what our game needs to do and how our objects look and how things work and the constraints we're working under. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, any producer is going to, with my stuff, you know, I don't think there's many people who are simultaneously creatively directing projects and also kind of implementing every bit of... Right now, the current project I've written all the code for, which I'm enjoying. But yes, on a bigger project, obviously, we would scale up the team. I wouldn't have that hands-on kind of control of things. But I do enjoy it. I've always... It's the reason I started making Thomas Was Alone was... I think I've talked about this before. I was a design manager in a mid-sized studio, and I wasn't writing code. I'd have meetings, and I'd talk to the coder and say, well, I want it to feel like this, and then they'd have a go at that, and I'd then want to change things and tweak things and fiddle. Thomas Was Alone was because I just wanted to make something. You know, I wanted to feel like I was actually building a thing, which was not a feeling I was getting at work. So Thomas Was Alone was that. Volume, you know, I did, like I said, the majority of the code on, but there were other people coming in and doing frankly, the stuff that I wasn't very good at, like server side, you know, UI, which I didn't know at the time very well. And yeah, this is a smaller project, so I can take that focus. But yeah, for sure, there's definitely an argument that someone else should be doing some of this stuff. But I'm having a great time. I feel like I'm getting back to my roots. It's like making Thomas again. It's nice.
So the optimization of the stuff that you're doing, what is optimization?
Well, optimization, it's a joke now amongst devs that it's the thing that everyone who plays games seems to... So you'll see in forum threads, like a game that maybe is running, say, 30 FPS on a console, and people will be like, why haven't they optimized it so it runs at 60 FPS? So I think there's a magical quality people assume with optimization that if you do it, you can make any game run at any spec and anything. And it's
Mike, all games should run at 60 FPS, 1080p.
We had this debate on the last show. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to take the bait. But yeah, I think it's an interesting part of the process, and there is a certain element of truth that if you have an unlimited amount of time to optimize, you can do amazing things. Like, you can make a game run in theory at something, but there's diminishing returns. So in our case, optimization is about making the game hit certain criteria we have for frame rate and resolution. But optimization is effectively about deleting and streamlining. You're removing stuff that no one notices, and you're streamlining the code you have to work faster.
So editing.
It effectively, yeah. I mean, it is editing. It's editing. It's also it's editing. That's a really good analogy to writing. It's editing. So for example, here's an example of some optimization. So I had I'm not giving away anything about the game by saying this. There were windows in the game. There were windows that you could look through, and you could see things through the window. I've just described every video game, but our game in particular, there was windows. And what I'd done was I'd put a slight, semi-transparent kind of colour on that glass, and it meant that you could kind of see there was a slight dimming to the window, and you could see the exterior through the window, as you'd expect. And it was fine. But what was happening there was it was quite expensive to render. It's always expensive to render things that are semi-transparent, because you have to render more pixels to make it work, because you're rendering the thing behind the object and the object.
And by expensive, you mean it's putting more resources.
Yeah, so in programming, when you say expensive, you're basically talking about like how much every piece of code you run takes a certain amount of time. We're literally talking about milliseconds. But, with a game, essentially a frame, you have to do all the code, draw the image on the screen, and that's a frame. So the more every millisecond you can trim from something, in theory, means the frame rate can go up. But anyway, with this window, I realized that I was essentially just adding color to the outside. Well, I was basically, if it's white, semi-transparent, I was just making everything behind that window a bit white. So what I did was I deleted the windows and changed the color of the exterior a little bit to get exactly the same color, and that speeds up the game. So it's stuff like that. It's just kind of working out like, how can I achieve this with less overhead, with less code. The other thing for me is...
So you took content away from the player.
I did. I took content away from the player. But it's about working out which content you can take away from the player. And yes, optimization often does lead to a visual downgrade. That is an aspect of it. But it's always a balancing act of what can we lose. And, it's possible to overreach and to make something that's ugly. And also, if you show your game particularly early, then... you can end up releasing a game that looks worse. And that's obviously something that's tripped up studios in the past. But I think we're removing the right stuff, and the game doesn't look noticeably worse. It looks better because we can put more stuff on the screen.
I paid for that game. Every time you take something away from it, you're taking value out of the game that I paid for.
You see, you're mocking the audience, which is a valiant approach to take.
No, I'm not mocking the. No, I'm not mocking the audience.
You're not. You're mocking specific silly people. But I think there is an argument. Like if you put stuff in a trailer and then it's not in the final game, I think people are absolutely justified in being frustrated by that. It's why you're very careful about what you show in a trailer.
Because I genuinely believe the audience is genuinely frustrated by people like that. Like this idea that editing it's like if you looked at the director's cut of a movie, which typically is not better than the You
usually watch a director's cut and go, oh, I see why they cut this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. But I don't think
with the exception of Gladiator. Watch Gladiator at some point. Director's cut of Gladiator is amazingly good. I really enjoy it. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Well, I mean, we could go into a director's cut.
That's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different show.
It's a different show.
But it is to me, I've seen it time and time and time again that that there is a very strong group, a very vocal group that recognizes it in movies, that editing is good in movies but not in games, or making it toward a specific audience or localization or any of these elements.
But I think that's also about, I think we've brought that on ourselves to an extent. For decades, games have been sold on the idea of amount of content. So like you'll see a marketing, this map is twice the size of the previous game. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. You don't see movies advertised as this film's 4 hours long, which makes it better value than that 2-hour film you watched last week. I think we've brought this on ourselves. I think we've created this expectation in the audience that size matters. And actually, it doesn't. It's about creating the experience that best serves people. It was funny watching people react to the No Man's Sky news a couple of weeks ago.
That was my favorite.
Where it's 6 gigabytes.
Dude, it's only 6 gigs. That's $10 a gig. I can't remember the last time I spent $10 a gig on a game.
It's funny because, any game developer reading that, there was 2 reactions. One was, good job, that's really cool. The other was, well, yeah, it's a procedurally generated game. They don't need to it's not like every planet is saved on the disk. That makes perfect sense. They would be a small file, but also like 6 gigs is impressive technically to achieve what we would expect the scope of that game to be. That's an impressive. That's well optimized. That's a well produced video game. I bet that game's going to be easy to install and quick to start, and the load times are going to be decent and this kind of thing. But yes, there's because you always have that image. The one that it always makes me laugh whenever I see it, and it happens all the time when people post up like the massive screenplays to their games, like the big wad of paper, and say this is the final screenplay for game X. And it's massive, and that's the whole point, is to point out, like, there's so much dialogue in our game. And it's just like, well, that's not a measurement of quality. That doesn't necessarily bode well. And what font size have you used on these documents? Because that will have an effect on, everyone can have a 1,000-page script if they use 70-point type, So I think I think we've brought this on ourselves as an industry to an extent. We've sold games in this specific way. But yeah, no, I ultimately a game's role is to entertain you and keep you interested and do its job. And anything that's helping with that, great. Anything that's not, we remove, But yeah, I think there's a very specific nuance to this when you actually advertise a game looking a certain way or having a certain feature, and then you sell the game and it doesn't. Obviously, that's a different problem.
And I think that's a topic for another week that we'll actually get into.
I think so.
Because that's a whole other conversation.
It really is.
Of presenting a game in a certain way, and then it's a completely different experience. I have no song to sing about reader mail this week. That makes it all the more tragic. I thought techno, and it just didn't work. Then I thought loungy, that didn't work. I wanted to do some kind of like pop version. No, that didn't work. I could do gospel. I could do gospel next week. I'll do gospel next week. Anyway, this piece of reader mail comes from a Gow.
Gow.
I
like that.
On YouTube. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, it all cycles back on itself. Is there a game you would like to play that could be made with a small budget, but no one has yet made it?
Yes, it's why I made indie games, because what I have is the power to make those games. Yes, Thomas Was Alone didn't exist, and then it did. Volume is another game. Like that's the motivation for what I do. Is I want a video game to exist. I have an idea in my head of a game that it would be really cool if that existed, and then when it doesn't, I solve that problem. So Thomas Was Alone was very much that I wanted a puzzle platformer of that type to exist. I thought that was an interesting mechanic, and I didn't understand why no one had done it. And Volume exists because I wanted more of that kind of game, and I hadn't seen a stealth game in that mold for a while. And crucially, I wanted people to be able to make their own levels, and I wanted always new stuff. And it made sense to make a game that did that, because that was something I wanted. And the game we're working on right now is very much born out of, there should be a game like this for this platform. That would be...
Well, I remember you specifically coming to me with the idea, and then we got paranoid and checked to see if there were examples of it anywhere, and then sort of explored it further, and now we're getting close to finally being able to talk about it. Just have to get some approvals, but
I think that's my motivation. And the stuff that we've been talking about kind of in the future, after this project again is the next big thing that I think we're going to make is the direct result of Alexander in a call coming to me and saying, hey, no one's made a game with this kind of vibe for literally decades. Why is that? And me going, sorry, I've never heard of that game. And then going off and doing my research and going, oh, there's something to this. It needs like this, and this, but like this is an interesting, compelling idea that no one's kind of gone near for a while. And I think that's going to be a thing. And what's funny about that is that's now mutated and changed to such an extent that I don't think players are going to necessarily know what the original idea from you was, because it's just mutated and changed through the conversation and through the process of designing it, that becomes its own thing. And there'll be, we'll see someone on Twitter say, oh, that game's just a clone of X, and there's going to be a little smirk on both of our faces because it's going to be like, yes, that was the starting point for this game, but then it kind of mutates and becomes its own thing. So I think that's the answer to the question. Is that's why I do what I do, is to plug these annoying gaps where games I want to exist don't exist. So the answer is I have lots of other games like that I want to exist that don't exist. But if I told you them on this podcast, then that would ruin the next 5 years of our output. So I'm not going to. But there's definitely, I think, another idea that me and Alexander have been batting around for a while now, for a few weeks, is something that, it's just me being into a specific kind of TV show. I think in this case, that no one's ever kind of explored those themes in a video game before. So I kind of want to do that. It's that kind of thing. So yeah, if you have those kind of ideas, if you have an idea in your head for like, why has an indie never made this? Then don't tell me. Go and make it. Go and play with that idea and see if you can make it. Because I think that's often where a really good idea starts. And I think that's true of a lot of developers.
And then pitch it, because then I might buy it. I know there are genres that you are not particularly fond of, or just
or inexperienced with.
Inexperienced, or it's just not part of your natural design aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Is that if you want to take a couple moments to think about one of those as an example of something that just hasn't been made, I'll go back to way back at the beginning of the show and say one of the things that a game that I would like to play that no one's done on a small budget is thinking about that map quality of Pokemon Go, and more the exploration of a map. That's a small. I think it has to have an amazing art budget, and I don't necessarily know what the game is in there, but something that involves a beautiful map, procedurally generated or just completely thought through design. But I think maps are cool, and maps aren't really used. There aren't really games that utilize maps, whether it's through keys or legends or anything along those lines. There are games that have really cool war table type maps, or there's a games like Card Hunters. I just always think of that time when you open up a fantasy novel or even a sci-fi book, and the first 2 pages are just a map of that world.
You almost want a game where you are the cartographer, right? Like you want something where you're involved in the creation or exploration, or forming that map. I agree. It's an idea that I'm disappointed you said on the podcast, though, because that's something I think we should explore at some point. I think there's a germ of something really interesting there.
We can still do it.
We can still do it. Someone else beat us to it, because we've got a few projects we want to do first.
Right. I mean that's really the reason why I'm bringing it up, is that
to force the hand of people.
Well, that's the thing, is like there's only, this is where games meets business, right? Like there's only a finite amount of time to be able to do things, and I'm fairly aware of the projects that we have sort of percolating or that we're going down, and none of them are this idea, and I still want to play that game. And I think that's where this question is coming from. Is just like, yes, there's a game that I want to play where you're the cartographer, where you're the person that is created or is exploring that map from when you open up a book and look at that map. Because that's the thing in those books that I was always obsessed with. Like,
there's definitely a Paul Bettany and Master and Commander game to be made, like the kind of that pioneering scientist who went with warships to explore brave new places. Like there's definitely something either in a sci-fi context or a historical context to do there, I think, or a fantasy context even. It's very cool. Because even
in video games, when the maps come up. Like if there's a globe with like different sections of a globe or something like that, like I'm just obsessed with that. Like
sure.
I love that stuff.
Maps are cool. To answer what I'm thinking, the one that I'm always consistently surprised no one's doing, or at least doing in a more kind of a broader audience sense is sports. I think a lot of indie game developers aren't really in sports. You get a lot of really cool local multiplayer games now being worked on, which are fun. But the idea of the kinds of things that were around when I was a kid, so specifically actually skateboarding, we should have an indie Tony Hawk game. And I think it would do amazingly well. I don't understand why I'm not seeing those games. I suspect it's because physics can be interesting and there's probably some very specific challenges, but...
So you're not talking about something like Ollie Ollie in that situation?
No, I'm not. Ollie Ollie is great, but no, I'm talking a more literal kind of 3D skateboarding game. It doesn't need to look like Tony Hawk. It could be a really cool minimalist style, or a very kind of simple style, or like more of a sci-fi, like a Jet Set Radio Future, even something like that. But like one of these kind of grind rail 3D skateboarding / rollerblading games, because it feels like there's a generation of players now who love that. You only have to look at how upset everyone was with Pro Skater, right? That's indicative that there's a hunger for this to be done right, like a hunger for kind of a spiritual successor to those games. And
that's where Paradox has taken it full power and advantage, right? Like,
well, that's they're owning that.
EA comes out with a SimCity that is derided, and then 18 months to 24 months later, hey, you've got City Skylines, which is everything anyone who was in that genre wanted.
You could also see Paradox doing that with the RTS genre. There's a lot of, there's definitely, I think there's good business to be made in paying attention as an indie to the areas where the bigger studios aren't putting the effort in. And yeah, I think that if a solid skateboarding game, with tricks, with maybe a competitive element, but maybe not a competitive element, maybe just like a high score table game,
I think one of the interesting...
I think that could work. I can't make it, but I think someone should,
Yeah, I think one of the interesting elements of what you just said was, you said sports, which automatically triggered in my head multiplayer, and indies have struggled in that.
Multiplayer is tough. It can really be tough.
Because you need a certain player size, and that's
also technically though. Also, it's a relative technical challenge. There are solutions to that, but none of them are perfect. Like there's always gaps in that.
Yeah, but I'm waiting for the case study that just shows something like Rocket League. That Rocket League benefited so amazingly from being that PlayStation Plus game, getting that massive install base. Yes, it is a fantastic game. It is a fantastic game. It is a fantastic sports game on its own. But there've been other fantastic indie multiplayer games. But you can't get that install base when you're asking someone to pay $15. So giving it out for PlayStation Plus and just full on, like, here's this game, it was free and it's amazing. That's Rocket League. That's how Rocket League.
And they've seen that spread out across other platforms then and make lots of money, elsewhere. I think that's the thing, is because it was given away free, but on a very specific platform, and that allowed for growth after the fact. But yeah, I think, like I said, local multiplayer indie games are awesome. They're often really weird and interesting and cool. But I think that there's definitely an audience who maybe would like something, a bit more realistic, shall we say. But in terms of, I mean realistic specifically in terms of its presentation. It's really fun watching Dan Marshall's, what's it called now? Like Hail the Footmen or something. It's a sarcastic football game that's kind of intentionally getting all the rules of football wrong. And it looks really fun. One of the things Dan's really good at as a designer is kind of feel and giving a sense of momentum and speed and interaction to games, and making a kind of a top-down 3D football game is using his skills amazingly well, and it already looks fantastic. And it's already we're seeing coverage on like lifestyle websites. Like it's not just indie game kind of fans who are into it. It's on the BBC over here. It's getting attention because football, is such a shared cultural thing, as with many sports and hobbies like skateboarding, that you're actually seeing this interesting crossover happen that you don't get with a pretentious story-based platformer, and it's very interesting to see. And it's unfortunately, not a genre that I'm particularly interested in making something in. But yeah, it's one of those growth areas where I can see indies who make something really cool and something, and I'm going to use the word accessible now, but I mean it.
You can't use that word. You can't.
I'm going to use it, but I'm going to use it in a cultural.
We're going to get letters, Mike. Don't
fine.
Use that word.
It's going to be fine. It's all safe. We have a very, very smart and wise listenership who will understand the context, which is cultural, which is that it's accessible because everyone's kicked a football around. Everyone's tried a skateboard and probably failed miserably. Like these are things that are real world logical. I think that's part of Pokemon Go's success beyond the 20 plus years of franchise building, is that it takes place in your street, so it has that kind of built-in like recognition and understanding. So I think there's definitely something there with the sports games. I'm kind of gutted that I just don't like playing them, so I don't know how to make one. That's basically the problem. But I don't think Rocket League is going to be the last major success story in that genre.
If you have a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@BithelGames.com. That's contact@BithelGames.com, through the YouTube comments of this show, or on Twitter by pinging @MikeBithell, @Slewinski, or our AI @VolumeGame. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide reviews and 5 stars on iTunes, likes and subscribes on YouTube, and positive reinforcement on whatever other platforms you're hearing the show on whenever possible. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We'll be back next week. I'm Alexander Slewinski. Thanks again, and get in the last word, Mike.
Vintage.